Hello and welcome to the Harrogate podcast with me, Andrew Gray. My job is to interview and to deconstruct the movers and shakers in the Harrogate and surrounding area. Today I'm delighted to have with me Judith Rogerson. Judith is the Lib Dem parliamentary candidate for Harrogate and Knaresborough. She's also a barrister. Today I'm recording on the 25th of October 2019, which is highly relevant because in the newspapers today, I'll read out some of the headlines just so we give some context to this podcast. The Guardian starts with, Johnson tells MPs, back my December the 12th election bid. The Daily Telegraph says, end this nightmare, Johnson tells Corbyn. And the Financial Times, Johnson challenges Corbyn to end deadlock with December elections. This is a fabulous time to interview the parliamentary candidate for the Liberal Democrats in this area. And Judith, welcome. Good morning. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. It's great to be here. We've talked about doing this for a while, so I'm glad we've finally got around to it.
Yes, thank you for your time. I know you're very busy and you're probably back on the election campaign this afternoon. Mm-hmm. So my first question to you is this, and I'm going to give you some difficult questions, probably more difficult than I usually give to people on the Harrogate podcast, but you are standing for election and you do need to be held to account. So between 1997 and 2010, this was a safe-ish Liberal Democrat seat. Since 2010 to present day, it's been a very safe Conservative seat. As it sort of swung between those two, what do you think the chances are of you becoming our next MP, whenever the election is, which may well be mid-December?
I think the chances are very good. Whether it is on the 12th of December, we don't know yet. We might know better next week. But we're assuming that an election is coming very soon. The government's got a majority of minus 40-something. We can't continue like this, whatever happens with Brexit. So there is going to be an election. Well, what are our chances here in Harrogate and Knaresborough? They're very good. As you said when you introduced me, for 12 years we had a Lib Dem MP here, Phil Willis, very popular MP who achieved an awful lot for the area. So we've got that history of being a Lib Dem constituency. We are the opposition on the council still. We always have been for a very long time. Things have changed an awful lot since 2017. Politically in the country, we're in a massively different situation. The traditional allegiances between the parties really have started to break down. And we're seeing that from canvassing. We've been doing an awful lot of canvassing all over the constituency over the past few months. And we've got people telling us who they're saying, well, I've always voted Conservative, I've always voted Labour, but this time I'm going to vote Lib Dem. And it's not just what people are telling us, it's not just what the polls are saying. We've seen that demonstrated by election results over the past year. So in Knaresborough last year, we had a county council by-election. The Lib Dems won that with 55% of the vote.
Goodness.
So that was great. And then the next election we've had since then was the European elections. Well, in Harrogate district, which is a much bigger area than Harrogate and Knaresborough constituency, the Lib Dems came second. We weren't that far behind the Brexit Party who won the district. We know within Harrogate and Knaresborough we did very strongly, but across the district we very clearly beat the Conservatives and we very clearly beat Labour. So we are really contenders here. From what people are telling us, we know that we can win. We're not taking anything for granted. It will probably be very close. But we're campaigning to win this whenever that election comes. So yes, I plan to be the next MP here whenever it happens.
And I think it's highly likely that you will be, and I wish you luck with that. I very much do. And you mentioned the Euro elections and Lib Dems finishing in this area behind the Brexit Party. The Brexit Party might not even be standing at the next election, depending on where we're up to. It's so completely confused at this time that it could be that they are taken out of the equation by either a no-deal Brexit or some sort of deal with Boris Johnson that actually incentive you knock them out to Lib Dems potentially in first place. How very exciting. But I've started with a hard question, and I apologies for that. But let's get to know Judith, the human being, wherever
you... question.
Yeah, it was a tough one, but this is the day. It is the 25th of October.
Yeah.
We had Not So Super Saturday not many days ago, so I think it's right to sort of start with that. Now, tell us about you. Tell your early years, your university time, your career, and so on to present day.
So, Harrogate and Knaresborough is where most of my family live. I live in the middle of Harrogate. There are 4 generations of my family living in Knaresborough now, aged between 4 and almost 90. I wasn't born here, but over the years our family has all drifted up here. So it's probably 15 years now that I've been spending a lot of my time here. And the way it works out for our family is it was my brother who moved here first in the early 2000s, and then gradually we've all come to see what a wonderful place it is. We've all drifted up here over those years, and this is our home now. So this is a special place. It's the centre of my family. It's where I want to be. I studied law at university.
I think you got a first. I was going to mention that. They don't hand those out, particularly where you studied as well. So well done, sort of many years after then, but well done.
It was a long time ago now. So I did law at Oxford, and then after that I took a year out and went to work in France for a year. My godmother is French, and she's retired now, but she was an English teacher in a school in France. And she said, "Why don't you come and be the English assistant in my school?" So I did that and went and had a great year in France. Learnt the language. I'd done French at school, but actually being immersed with French families in a small town in the north of France, I had a great time doing that. But then I came back to the UK in 2002, went to bar school, qualified as a barrister, and that's what I've been doing for the last 16 years. My area of speciality is healthcare. So I represent doctors, patients, the NHS. That's been my career. But for the last 4 years, I've been very much involved in the Liberal Democrats. And it was last year I was chosen to be the candidate for Harrogate and Knaresborough. So here I am. That's how I got here.
Thank you for explaining it. Most politicians who I know, I come from a family where most people are interested in politics. They've been involved in politics almost since they were like teenagers, if not before then. And they joined political parties as soon as they were allowed to at 16, and they tended not to change. You've only sort of more recently sort of joined a political party. You're not your traditional sort of MP of any colour. Why has it taken you so long to join a party?
I've always been interested in politics. It was something that, our family always used to, on election night, we'd have an election party, and I think we'd all sit down and talk about it. I've always been very interested and engaged in it. But, like most people, it was something that would come up every 4 years is when you'd really pay attention to what was happening. And, getting on with life, a career, your family, your friends. Politics was important, but it wasn't dominating my life. But then that all changed. 2016 was that sort of tipping point. I'd always thought about getting involved, but there were other things were going on. But 2016, we had the referendum, and that was, at that point, I thought, I'm either going to ignore this and pretend this isn't happening, or get stuck in and try and make a difference and improve this situation, try and turn things around. And I felt like I was in a position to do that. And I thought, I'm going to regret it if I don't try. I've got to do something to get involved in politics and try and make a difference. So I joined the Lib Dems, just got stuck in and started out just helping out other people who were standing for election. We then had the 2017 election, and I was very much involved in that. And then it was after that I decided that I was going to stand myself, and Harrogate and Knaresborough was the obvious place to do that. It's a place where the Lib Dems have got a really good chance of winning it back. And as I said a moment ago, it's where my family are. So that's how I've ended up doing that. And looking at the Liberal Democrats as a whole, our party has changed very dramatically over the last 5 or 6 years. We've had a massive increase in membership. So the majority of our members weren't members of a political party, certainly weren't members of the Lib Dems. They may have been members of another party, but have only come to this recently because they've realised that this is something we really care about, our country, and we want the best for our country. And we've been drawn to the Liberal Democrats because we felt that that's the sort of the politics, the aims and the values that they had best fitted what we wanted. So we're actually quite, not in years terms, but in political years, quite a young party in terms of our membership. We're new members who have got involved because they want to make a difference. A lot of the candidates who will be standing at the next general election, similar to me, people who didn't set out from the age of 15, 16 to become a politician, but we've fallen into this because we've decided we've got to do something and this is the right thing to do.
And I personally think that it's right that people have a life before they go into politics. I think from whatever political persuasion you come from, it's always sad when you see people that have done usually politics, philosophy and economics, which is what I did at university, and then they go in to become a special advisor to whichever political party, and then they eventually become an MP, and the only job they've ever had was in politics, and you're not in that mould. I don't think the current incumbent, in all fairness to him either as well, has not come from that background as well, which I think is incredibly healthy. Now, you're all over Harrogate Advertiser this week, which I'm sure you're delighted to be in. You've got lots of followers on Twitter or Facebook and so on, and you're knocking on however many doors and delivering leaflets. Now, what are the people in Harrogate and Knaresborough, what are they saying to you? Be frank with us all. What are they saying to you on the doorstep when you knock on the door and say, "Hi,
hello,
I'm the candidate. I want to be the MP here." Are they slamming their doors in your faces? Are they offering you cups of tea? Come on in and talk to me about Brexit. What are people saying in this area?
People aren't slamming the doors. canvassing, knocking on doors, call it canvassing, is actually a really quite enjoyable experience at the moment if you're a Lib Dem. Even people who don't agree with us are telling us that they're pleased that we're out there talking to them. There isn't an evening or an afternoon that goes by when we're canvassing when someone doesn't say to us, "You're the first person who's ever knocked on my door. Thank you for coming to talk to me." And that's what it's about. I want to know what people think about what's happening. And that's often the conversation we end up having is just, tell me what you think about the situation we're in at the moment.
And what are they saying? Come on, what are they?
So what are they telling us? Well, the one thing at the moment that pretty much everyone brings up is Brexit, because that is dominating everything. And I'm sure we'll come on to talk about this in a moment, that how bad that is for our country, that everything else is being neglected because of Brexit. Most people are telling us they're fed up with it.
Just get it done, are they saying?
Well, not so much get it done, more of a make it stop. And so at the moment, and today, this week, this is the rhetoric we're getting from Boris Johnson and the government, is that let's just get this done, let's get Brexit done, let's leave the EU next week. I don't think that's going to happen as things stand. But I think it's important for people to realise that getting Brexit done won't be the end of it. This is just the beginning. And this is going to go on for years and years and years. The only way to make it stop is to put a stop to Brexit. Now, that's what the Lib Dems want to do. We're very clear it's got to be done democratically. And then again, this is something I think we'll probably come on to talk about in a minute.
It's going to be the question I was going to ask you about. And this seems like the right time to do it.
Yeah.
But what everybody seems to be saying, I'm listening to, they're saying the Lib Dems are anti-democratic. They want to cancel Brexit. We have a referendum, 52, 48, and now having Liberal Democrats are wanting to cancel it. That is a illogical, undemocratic, almost authoritarian, disgraceful step for the Lib Dems, and it's provoked quite a lot of anger. I mean, surely you're saying this on the doorstep, and how can you defend that position?
It's absolutely not anti-democratic to ask for more democracy, which is exactly what we're doing. Well, as I said, we want to stop Brexit, but it's got to be done democratically. Now, ever since the referendum results, it's been our position that, yes, the government has a mandate to go and negotiate a deal, which is what they've done. Once that deal is negotiated, the right thing to do is to come back to the people with a referendum and say, this is what Brexit looks like. Do you want that? Or do you want what we've got now? Now, what I'm not saying that no one understood what we were voting for in 2016. What I'm saying is no one knew what Brexit looked like then. We didn't have a deal. And what we've got now is very different from what they were promising in 2016. £350 million a year, exact same benefits that we would have had. That is not what we've got. What Boris Johnson is proposing is a border down the Irish Sea. We're not having the exact same benefits that we would have had. We don't know what the trade deals are going to look like because we don't have them yet.
So how can the Dems say that they're going to revoke Article 50 then?
So what we want to do, as I say, our view has always been the best way to sort this out is have a referendum with a choice between the deal and keeping what we've got, a choice to remain. So the people have the final say.
Would no deal be part of that referendum?
That would be for Parliament to decide. Now, personally, I think no deal would be a catastrophe for this country, but it's for Parliament to decide what should be on that referendum ballot. But what absolutely must be there is an option to remain. So put it back to the people, give the people the final say to decide, this is what Brexit looks like. We're nearly 4 years down the line now. A lot has changed. Is this what you want? It might be that we get a general election before we have a referendum.
Which is looking highly likely.
It looks like that's the way we're going now. So what the Lib Dems have said is if we have a general election, we will give the people an option to vote to remain by voting for the Liberal Democrats, because if we're the majority government, we would revoke Article 50. But that's only if we have more MPs, more than 50% of the MPs, 300 and whatever it is, 20-something MPs.
The Dems are about 21 MPs now, 22, whatever it is.
We'll have a lot more than that at the next election. But we've said if you elect a government which has promised to revoke Article 50, we'll do that. That's how democracy in this country works. You have a manifesto and you enact that. If the people choose not to elect a majority Liberal Democrat government, we'll continue to campaign for a referendum. So if you're going to remain in the EU, you've got to revoke Article 50. And our position is we've got to find a democratic way. Our preference is a referendum. If it's not a referendum, we're giving people the option to vote for a government that will do that. Either way, that's not anti-democratic because the people have voted for it.
I hear what you're saying, but let me put to you the Labour policy, which I'm sure you'll know, which is vote for Labour. If they're in charge, they will then allow a second referendum or a confirmatory vote on that. Is that a more democratic, more logical position when it comes to the question of Brexit?
Our policy is very clear. The people know that we are a party of Remain. At Labour at the moment, as far as I understand it, are remaining neutral on remaining and leaving if there's a general election. We want the people to know where we stand, and that is, if you vote for the Liberal Democrats, it's a vote to stop Brexit.
Yeah, it's crystal clear, yeah. What is Labour policy on it? It's been confused for so long.
You need to ask a Labour person.
And I'm not sure even they would know. And I don't think that's unfair to point that out. Let's change a little bit from Brexit. Let's talk about the environment.
Yeah.
Now, what is the Liberal Democrats' policy in relation to the environment, particularly carbon neutrality?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to what are people talking about on the doorsteps, and it's something that people do mention. And I think if it weren't for Brexit, the environment and climate change would very likely be right at the top of our agenda for the most important issues, because this is going to affect us and the next generations for the future of our country for years to come, for the world. The Lib Dem policy on this is that we would aim to become net zero emissions by 2045. And it's something we debated at our party conference a few weeks ago about picking the date. Should it be 2050? Should it be 2030? 2045 is a point that we've looked at as a party that we recognise as a realistic target. Because if you're going to have a target, it's got to be a realistic one, and we believe that that's achievable. How do we do it? Well, again, touching back on Brexit, this is an issue that we can't deal with as the UK alone. We've got to work with our partners around the world, and it's the EU who we're working with at the moment as part of the EU to work together to find ways to protect our planet, work towards carbon neutrality. So working with other countries, it's a good reason to stay in the EU. Our policies include working towards ending the use of fossil fuels, so promoting renewable energy. It's something that during the coalition, the Lib Dems worked on very hard. Ed Davey, MP, was the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. During that time, there was a lot done to expand the UK's offshore wind farms. And I think if we're not if not one of the leading countries in the world for offshore wind. So we need to be looking at that. It means investment in those industries and infrastructure, which is good for our economy. And there's a lot of investment around Hull, which is where they build the wind turbines, but also saving the planet by switching away from the fossil fuels. We want to ban fracking, which we think is a bad thing, damaging to the environment. Encourage people to build environmentally friendly homes. We need more houses in this country, but they've got to be sustainable, environmentally friendly ones. We need to encourage people out of fossil fuel cars, petrol-driven cars.
Agreed. We're looking to put a charging point into our office for all our sort of colleagues to use. I mean, love the Lib Dems or loathe the Lib Dems. I think it's fair to say that for as long as I can remember, Lib Dems have always been one of the leading lights, if not the leading party, perhaps with the Greens, on matters of the environment. And people like me have thought, well, fair enough for the Lib Dems on that. It's now come to the fore, but Lib Dems have been banging on about it for decades, as far as I can remember.
And we should be banging on about this rather than Brexit.
Yeah, I think most people are tired of the B word.
Yeah.
And let's just bin the B word for a moment. Let's talk some very specific Harrogate related things.
Yeah.
So, as this is October 2019, of course we had the UCI World Cycling Championships, or whatever it's called, not too long ago.
Yeah.
Do you have a personal view as to whether it was beneficial for Harrogate? Because it's all over the newspapers at the moment, and everybody's whining about the state of the straight. Understandably, it's a bit of a mess around West Park. It's just incredibly muddy. You then have a lot of businesses saying, "Oh, it was dreadful for us," but other businesses saying it was fabulous. People love the cycling, and there's more people on the bikes than ever before. But then you got people that couldn't get to the shops, and people panic buying in Asda and so on. So, what are your thoughts on the UCI?
In terms of watching the cycling itself, I live quite close to the track, so I went down on several days and watched it, and I really enjoyed that. It was a great atmosphere, particularly on the final weekend. But you're right that a lot of people have raised concerns about the impact it had on local businesses, on the issues around road closures. At the other end of the scale, some people clearly benefited from it. Now, I think we need to take a step back and look at this properly. It's not for one person to make a snap judgment on whether or not it was a good or a bad thing. You've got to look at the evidence, and I know that there were groups out there doing that. We've got to look at what worked and what didn't work, because we need to bring investment. We need to bring attention to Harrogate. It was fantastic in the sense that millions of people were looking at our town, and I know that people from outside the area were saying to me, friends and family, "Oh, I saw Harrogate on TV. It looked fantastic." And I've seen on Twitter people saying, "Oh, come and visit Harrogate. It looked great." But we've got to look at how it impacted us here locally. Was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing? And then as part of the wider picture of looking at the future of the town. What's our vision for the town? Do we want to be having these big international events, or are there other ways that we want to bring people into the town centre? So I think it's something that, let's take a step back, let's look at the evidence, and then work together and decide, is this something we want to be doing again in the future, or are there other things that we want to do to bring people into town?
Very diplomatic and barristery answer, if I can say, looking at the evidence. But I'm all for looking at evidence, which is something that seems to have been lacking in the last few years in politics. So thank you for your thoughts on UCI. We talk about business and is it good and bad for business? What is crystal clear is if you walk around Harrogate now, there are more closed shops than I have ever seen. You can even hear some people walking onto the main shopping street and they'll say, oh, look how many shops are closed. Like, you can hear it being spoken about by visitors to the town. They're shocked to see. They think Harrogate is some retail metropolis, and it isn't that anymore. Do you have any views as to why there are so many closed shops, and what's the Lib Dem policy on improving Harrogate town centre?
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of factors feeding into it. Part of it is the changing nature of our economy and the way that people shop. Obviously, a lot of people now do their online shopping. We're all guilty of doing that. We're busy people. It's easier to buy something online than it is to go into town. But, I mean, Harrogate Town Centre is lovely, and I love it, and I live right on the edge of Harrogate Town Centre, and I want it to stay a thriving place that people want to come and visit. But we've also got to recognise that there are challenges there. Not just in Harrogate, Knaresborough, Boroughbridge, all our town centres within our constituency, but all over the country as well. The future of the high street and town centres is something that the Lib Dems have looked at. We came up with policies last year at our party conference, open this year actually in York, where we looked at that and what can we do to make sure that our town centres remain viable and thriving. So we need to adapt to our new economies, but it's also things like looking at business rates, which is we think an antiquated system that isn't fair and doesn't reflect the modern economy. That was something that last year the Lib Dems produced a detailed paper on, and we now have a policy that we would scrap business rates as they are and replace it with a land value levy, which would be paid by the owner of the land rather than the tenant.
What a good idea.
And we think that you're taxing the value of the land rather than what's on the land, which in today's economy doesn't work out fairly, and it penalises smaller businesses. It makes it. I'm sure that there are shops that have had to leave because that's one of the factors that has led into it. Now, clearly, you would need to adjust rents to reflect that, but the study has shown that in most cases it would result in a reduction of taxation being paid. It takes that burden off the small businesses that they're not paying the tax. It's not just business rates, it's looking at fair taxation across the board. That's something that's very important to the Liberal Democrats. For individuals, it was the Liberal Democrats who ensured that we had the increase in the personal allowance and income tax, which took the lowest earners out of income tax. We want to continue with that project of making taxes fairer, so that for individuals, but also for small businesses, for SMEs, to make sure that they can expand, that people setting up new businesses aren't penalised by the taxation system, but equally that the big multinational companies are paying their fair share. So things like corporation tax, let's look at that. Is there a way to make that fairer, to make it easier for the small companies, to make sure that the big companies are paying their fair share of what they should be contributing?
All sounds very logical to me. I mean, it does astonish me that the taxation system hasn't seemed to have caught up with where the economy is.
Yeah.
And there seems to be, to me, that there ought to be some sort of transaction tax on the Facebooks, the Googles, the Amazons of this world. And I'm puzzled that there hasn't been one.
I mean, it's difficult when you've got multinational companies all around the world, but
sure,
we need to think outside the box. And that's the way that the world works now. And how can we deal with that to make taxation fairer for everyone?
Yeah, it's nearly 2020. I can't believe we're having this conversation. I mean, Amazon's been around for, seems like most of my lifetime. Okay, I'm glad that you talk about business rates. As a business owner in the Harrogate Town Centre myself, I find business rates just mind-bogglingly confusing and incredibly expensive. It is a barrier to doing business in town. It very much is, and we're on the outskirts here, so our business rate is probably a little bit less than others. Well, thank you for answering that point. Now, I mean, are there any particular favourite places you go in town? Any bars, restaurants, nightclubs, even anything that you would? Where does Judith Chillaxing in Harrogate?
most of the chillaxing is probably either at my house or at my family's house. But no, I do really, as I said, I live right on the edge of town. I can see into the town centre from my living room window. I'm a big fan actually of the cinema. Well, I live within spitting distance of 2 cinemas, which is a bit of a luxury. There are some fantastic cafes.
There's so many.
I
can't even name them all.
I know. The one that I always take my friends to when they come to visit is Balthazar's, which is the Norwegian cafe.
I've not been there for a while.
Which I very much enjoy it. And
there's lots.
Knaresborough is somewhere that I very much enjoy going to. I really do love Knaresborough. It's around Castlegate and that there. It's just fantastic. I've been coming to that area long before I moved back up to Yorkshire when I came home. But for the past 15 years, I've always been going over to Knaresborough, and I love quirky little places, the shops and the streets around there.
We are spoiled for choice. We really much are. People always say that Harrogate and Knaresborough, the best place to live in the UK. What are your sort of favourite reasons for living around here? What is it? Outdoors, the shops. What is it?
It's a bit of everything, isn't it? You have got the shops and the cinemas, and Harrogate Theatre. Those sorts of places to go to. Fantastic events as well. Harrogate International Festivals, we really punch above our weight with some of the stuff they put on. Equally in Knaresborough, their Fever Festival in the summer, where they have their arts festival, which is just brilliant. Knaresborough are brilliant at those sort of local community, slightly quirky things that they do. One thing that I particularly remember was during the Tour de France, all the children in the schools painted a T-shirt with a pattern on, and then they strung it up as bunting around the town. It just looked amazing. And I can remember my nephew, I think he was still at nursery school then, going out showing me where just little things like that make it a real community. It's beautiful as well. I always take people to the castle in Knaresborough and show them that view. You can't beat it.
You can't. And when you take the train to York and you're going through Knaresborough, it's just like, wow.
You say, wow, you really live here.
Yeah. It does feel like you're in a film, actually. When
you're within 10 minutes, you're out in the countryside. You can't beat the Yorkshire countryside.
Why does anyone live anywhere else? I always am amazed by that. Now, I mentioned trains then. I think trains are a particular passion of yours. I'm not sure what train spottery sort of
not
way.
Not in a train spotting way, but I talk about it a lot.
But why is that? Surely they've improved of late. In the years I've lived here, the trains have got better. Sometimes you even plug your phone into them.
Yeah, some of them have got sockets now. But so my day job is a barrister, and that involves a lot of travelling to go to court, to go to meetings. So I go to Manchester a lot, to Leeds, Sheffield, down to London, up to Newcastle. And for me, that means getting a connection out of Harrogate to Leeds or to York or what have you. A couple of months ago, I gave a talk to some students who were thinking about becoming barristers, and one of them said, "What's the most stressful part of your job?" And I said, "Getting there." And they all laughed and thought I was joking. Well, I wasn't, because it's true that the number of times that I'm late for court or late for a meeting because the train hasn't turned up, or more often it's 15 minutes late and I miss my connection, it's incredibly stressful. It's incredibly disruptive in our personal lives and our professional lives. And this is happening to so many people. It's not just me being irritated every so often. Day after day, we can't rely on our local train service at the moment. We've still got the Pacer trains, which are horrendous.
Could you describe the Pacer trains to people who don't know what they look like?
They're basically a bus on wheels.
1940s or whatever.
They're quite 40s, but they're way past their sell-by date. Now, we have had some new trains, which I think are second-hand trains that have come down from Scotland, and we're told that we are going to get new trains, but time after time, we've been promised that the Pacers were going to be phased out, and it hasn't happened. Reliability-wise, there was a study not that long ago which showed that the trains are less reliable now than they were this time last year. We're in the 21st century. We should have a 21st century rail service. And yes, we're getting more trains direct down to London, which is great. But for me, the real problem is getting between the northern towns and cities in this country. It takes me as long to get to Manchester or to Sheffield, which is 30, 40 miles away, as it does to get to London, which is crazy.
Yes, you can make it up.
No, and for the northern economy, the trouble you have travelling between towns and cities, that cannot be a good thing. And if it's forcing people off the trains into their cars, that's adding to congestion, to pollution, which again is a bad thing. So we need a reliable, affordable rail service so that we can live our lives and get on the train and know that we're going to get where we want to be when we want to be there.
I agree. Now, I often take my children to the York Train Museum. And it's amusing because we go by train to the train museum, and we go on those awful sort of Pacer trains. And you're thinking, hang on, which decade am I in when you get on all those trains and it's rattling around? And then you do the walk to the York Train Museum, and it's free. You go in there, and we've been lots of times. And the kids' favourite train to go and visit is the Japanese bullet train, which is from the 1970s.
Yeah.
And you get anything there, and you've in 2019 taken a train which is far worse than the Japanese bullet train that's in a museum.
It's 40 years old.
Yeah, it's very, very strange. With TVs and food being served and what have you, it's odd how trains have not really improved.
Well, I think it's a Victorian system in this country, and that's the problem, that we're catching up with that. But it's looking at the way we run the system, with franchises and whether that's the right way to do things. But also it comes down to, you've got to invest proper, decent trains and tracks, ultimately.
Thank you. Now, we're getting towards the end of the podcast. I've asked a few people, I told them I was going to interview you today, and they said, could you ask her this question, please?
Yeah.
And this is a question from a colleague of mine who says, could you give advice to people, wherever they live in the country, about sort of Remain alliances? And, for example, if you live in an area where Labour are likely to win and might be second referendum-y, and Tories are second, should you vote Lib Dem there? What are your thoughts on Remain alliances? Any thoughts?
Well, look at what happened in Brecon and Radnorshire, which is where there was a parliamentary by-election over the summer. It was a seat that the Conservatives held with a fairly healthy majority. I think it's about 10,000. The Greens and Plaid Cymru, I think it was, stood down and agreed not to stand against the Liberal Democrats. And the Lib Dems won it by a fairly small margin, but won it by working together because they had that agreed. Our political system is broken. Often people end up having to vote against the people they don't want rather than the people they do want. And that's tough. And, in certain areas, you have to say to people, the party that you're supporting hasn't got a chance of winning here. You've got to vote tactically. But that's what we're stuck with at the moment. Now, it's not for me to make decisions about official Remain alliances and so on, but I think that is something that people need to think about when it comes to the next election. Who has got the best chance of beating the Conservatives, if you want to beat the Conservatives? In Harrogate and Knaresborough, the party with the best chance of beating the Conservatives is far and away the Liberal Democrats. So you've got to vote for us if you don't want a Conservative MP. If you want a Liberal Democrat MP, even better.
And if you were to become the MP in sort of mid-December or whenever the election is called, will you be actually any good at the job? I mean, just because you're a barrister and you speak really well and you come from the area and you work really hard, etc. But there's more to it than all those things. I mean, will you become like, what everybody wants is a constituency MP where the MP is known in the area.
Yeah.
Everyone almost knows them by name. Oh, there's the MP. Yeah. Oh, and the MP knows your name and shakes your hand and, kisses the babies and all that. Yeah, well, not going to say, that's a bit weird. No one does that.
They're related to me, obviously.
Yeah, they're related to you, niece and nephews. But, will you become that constituency MP that will be the MP for everybody, who, regardless of Brexit or Remain, Tory, Labour, Greens, whatever it is, will you be that person? How can you say that you will be, but, could you explain how you would go about that?
Because, this goes back to where we started. I didn't set out my career intending to become an MP. It's something I've grown into, and having looked at how can I best help the country, our community. The role model really is Phil Willis, who was the MP here. He was the Lib Dem MP here for 13 years, 97 to 2010, 13 years. And again, when we go door knocking, his name comes up time and time again, and he was exactly that. Someone that was well known, well liked, who worked really hard for the community. And that's really where I want to be. It's someone who really cares about this area, who cares about people. As you say, regardless of how you voted, once I'm the MP, I'm your MP, however you voted. And then persuade you, hopefully, that next time around you want to vote for me because you see that I'm a great MP. But it's about standing up for people, representing people. Well, that's what I've done for the past 16 years, represented people in a different way. And I want to use those skills that I've got to help people for the issues that matter to them, for the things that I care about engaging with people. Even if you don't agree with them, you can have a perfectly polite conversation, listen to their views, might change my mind. And then going back to Westminster, going back there and then representing the people here, the best of my abilities. I want to be like Phil Willis. And I want to be a good constituency MP who listens to everyone.
Fair enough. Judith, do you have any final messages for anyone listening? Anything that we've not touched upon that I'm happy to give you the floor? so to speak?
I mean, it's been really great to chat to you.
Thank you. And how do people get in touch with you if they want to sort of give you a bit of a knockabout about the Brexit word?
Well, about anything really. I mean, there's lots of other issues we can talk about. Funding schools, that's something that comes up all the time. They're the things that have been forgotten for the last few years. I know that there are head teachers in Harrogate and Knaresborough and Boroughbridge who are really struggling to be able to cope with the resources they've got. NHS provision, there's been a big issue about they're closing the mental health ward in Harrogate. I know people are worried about that. We know now that that care is going to be available in York, but again, it's a worry for people that that's a long way to travel. If you've got family members, you need to be there. Things like that. Brexit's, it's an issue to engage about, but there are lots of other important issues, the town centre, the environment. The best way to get in touch with me is by email. If you look on the Harrogate and Knaresborough Lib Dems website, you can find my email address. If you search for me on the internet, you'll find my Twitter, you'll find my Facebook. It's all there. I'm really keen to engage with people if you want to get in touch and you've got something to share with me.
What a lovely way to finish. Thank you very much for your time today. Wish you all the best on the campaign trail.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judith.